What if a reclusive millionaire, haunted by his past, found himself persistently followed by two identical little girls, desperately seeking his help for a reason that would unravel his entire existence? Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Alexander Sterling, a name synonymous with unimaginable wealth and impenetrable solitude, navigated his days within the gleaming, sterile confines of his penthouse apartment or the hushed mahogany-paneled walls of Sterling Industries. His fortune, a vast empire built on shrewd investments and ruthless decisions, was a fortress that kept the world at bay and, just as effectively, imprisoned him within its gilded cage. He was a man who had everything, yet possessed nothing of true value. His heart a barren landscape where joy had long since withered. The city sprawled beneath his panoramic windows, a vibrant tapestry of lives he observed but never touched, its myriad stories a distant hum beyond the soundproof glass. His routine was a meticulously crafted bulwark against intrusion. Coffee, black. Meetings, brief. Interactions, minimal. The ghosts of his past were his only constant companions, whispering regrets in the quiet hours of the night. Chief among them, the memory of Ilara, a love lost to circumstances he had never fully understood, a wound that time had scabbed over but never healed. He preferred the company of spreadsheets and market reports to people. Numbers were predictable, human emotions a treacherous mire he'd learned to avoid. His staff, efficient and discreet, moved like phantoms, catering to his needs with an unspoken understanding of his preference for isolation. Even his own sister, Cassandra, a woman whose ambition rivaled his own, though directed more towards social climbing and control of the family legacy, found him an increasingly distant and difficult enigma. He was, by all accounts, a man perfectly insulated from the messiness of human connection. It began on a Tuesday, a day no different from any other in Alexander's meticulously ordered existence. His chauffeured limousine, a sleek black Sentinel, purred to a stop outside a small artisanal bakery he occasionally frequented, one of the few concessions he made to unstructured pleasure. As he stepped out, his gaze, typically fixed on the pavement ahead, snagged on two small figures huddled in a nearby doorway. Twin girls, no older than 7 or 8, with wide, solemn eyes and identical, neatly plaited brown hair, watched him with an unnerving intensity. Their clothes were clean but worn, their small faces etched with a premature seriousness. He frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. Children were an anomaly in his world, unpredictable and often loud. He dismissed them as a momentary distraction, collected his pastries, and returned to the car, the image of their unwavering stare briefly troubling the smooth surface of his thoughts before being submerged by the pressing concerns of his upcoming board meeting. But the following day, as his car idled at a traffic light 2 blocks from his office, he saw them again. This time, they were standing on the corner, their eyes like 2 pairs of searching beacons, finding his car amidst the throng of city traffic. One of them, slightly bolder perhaps, took a tentative step towards the curb as if to approach, before her sister pulled her back. A strange disquiet settled over Alexander. Coincidence? Perhaps. But their gaze was too direct, too focused. "Mark," he said, his voice crisp, addressing his head of security who sat in the passenger seat. "Those 2 girls on the corner. Find out who they are, why they seem to be everywhere." Mark, a man of few words and immense capability, simply nodded. "Consider it done, Mr. Sterling." Alexander leaned back against the supple leather, the image of those 2 small, serious faces imprinted on his mind, an unwelcome crack in the carefully constructed walls of his solitude. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings and decisions, yet beneath the surface, a current of unease flowed, pulling him back to the mystery of the little girls who seemed to be shadowing his every move. Who were they, and what could they possibly want from him, a man who had made it his life's work to be unapproachable? The question lingered, a discordant note in the symphony of his otherwise predictable life, a premonition that something was about to change. Mark was, as always, efficient. By the next morning, a slim file lay on Alexander's vast, uncluttered desk. "The girls are twins, Lily and Rose Miller, 7 years old, sir," Mark began, his tone neutral. "They live with their mother, an Ilara Miller, in a small apartment in the West District, about 3 blocks from that bakery. The mother appears to be unemployed, or at least not recently employed. Neighbors say she keeps to herself, and the children are often seen playing alone in the small park nearby or running errands. They're struggling, sir, considerably." Mark paused, a rare hesitation in his voice. "There's something else. The girls have been asking about you specifically at local shops, describing your car, asking if anyone knows the sad rich man." Alexander's jaw tightened. Sad rich man. The audacity. And yet, a strange pang, something akin to an old bruise being pressed, resonated within him. He was rich, undeniably, but sad. He preferred to think of himself as pragmatic, focused, perhaps even hardened. But sad? The word felt like a judgment, an unwelcome mirror held up by 2 urchins. He pushed the file away. "And why are they following me? Does it say that?" Mark shook his head. "No, sir. That part remains unclear. They seem determined, but also frightened. My operative observed them yesterday trying to approach your car again after you entered the building. They had a small crumpled envelope in their hands." "An envelope?" His annoyance warred with a nascent, unwelcome curiosity. What could they possibly want to give him? Money, he supposed. That was what everyone eventually wanted. He had built his life on the premise that every interaction had a price, every motive an angle. These children, despite their apparent innocence, were likely no different, perhaps goaded by their struggling mother. He imagined a sob story, a plea for a handout. The thought solidified his resolve to ignore them. He had charities he donated to, anonymously and generously. That was his contribution to the less fortunate. He wasn't about to engage in personal interventions. Yet their image persisted. 2 small faces, so serious, so young to carry such burdens. The West District. He knew it. A forgotten corner of the city where dreams went to die. A stark contrast to his own opulent world. Ilara Miller. The name meant nothing to him. Or did it? A faint echo, too distant to grasp, flickered at the edge of his memory, and then was gone. Later that afternoon, as his car approached the gates of his corporate headquarters, they were there again, standing directly in the path of the vehicle, forcing his driver to brake sharply. This time they were bolder, their fear seemingly overcome by a desperate resolve. Before Mark could exit the car, the slightly taller of the 2, Lily, as Mark had identified her, stepped forward, her small hand outstretched, clutching the aforementioned crumpled envelope. Her sister Rose stood just behind her, her knuckles white as she gripped Lily's worn sweater. Lily's voice, though trembling, was surprisingly clear. "Mister, please," she said, her eyes pleading, fixed on the tinted window she knew he was behind. "We need your help. It's for our mama." Alexander sat frozen, the world outside the reinforced glass suddenly too close, too real. These weren't just anonymous faces anymore. They were a direct, personal appeal. His carefully constructed indifference began to fracture. He could order his driver to move, to gently nudge them aside. He could have Mark deal with them, offer them some money, make them disappear. That was the sensible, sterling way. But their desperation, Their raw, unfiltered need had breached his defenses in a way no corporate adversary ever had. The envelope, clutched in Lily's small, determined hand, seemed to pulse with an untold story. What was in it? And why him? Why the sad, rich man? He found himself on the precipice of a decision he hadn't anticipated, a deviation from the script of his life. The silence in the car stretched, thick with unspoken questions. Alexander Sterling was not a man given to whims, yet he found himself instructing his driver to pull over into a quiet side street, a block away from his imposing office building. "Mark, tell them I will speak to them. 5 minutes, in the public garden across the street, and you will be nearby." Mark, ever discreet, merely nodded, a flicker of surprise in his usually impassive eyes. Alexander rarely deviated from his schedule, and never for something as unpredictable as an encounter with street children. He watched from his car as Mark approached the girls, who had remained rooted to the spot, their small forms dwarfed by the towering skyscrapers. He saw them look up at Mark, a mixture of fear and hope in their expressions. After a brief exchange, Mark gestured towards the small manicured park. Alexander took a deep breath, steeling himself. This was a mistake. He should have kept his distance, but the image of Ilara, his lost love, kept superimposing itself over the name Ilara Miller, a maddening, impossible coincidence he couldn't shake. He exited the car, the late afternoon sun glinting off the severe lines of his tailored suit, making him feel overdressed and out of place as he crossed towards the designated park bench. The girls were already there, perched on the edge of the cold stone, their hands clasped tightly in their laps. Lily, the more forthright one, met his gaze, while Rose studied her worn shoes, her shoulders hunched. "You wanted to speak to me," Alexander began, his voice more formal than he intended, the years of boardroom command difficult to shed. Lily nodded, her small chin jutting out with a courage that belied her size. "Yes, sir, it's our mama. She's not well, and we don't have any money for the doctor or for the special food she needs." Rose sniffled beside her, a tiny, almost inaudible sound. Alexander felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the precursor to a withdrawal, a retreat into cynicism. So it was about money. Of course it was. "And you thought I could help?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. Lily nodded again, more hesitantly this time. "We see your car. You look important. And sometimes you look sad, like Mama does." The innocence of the observation disarmed him. Sad, like their mother. He cleared his throat. "What is your mother's name?" he asked, though he felt he already knew the answer. A cold dread mixed with a wild, improbable hope coiling in his stomach. "Ilara," Rose whispered, looking up at him for the first time, her eyes a startling shade of blue, so familiar it made his breath catch. Ilara. It couldn't be. The world seemed to tilt slightly. "Ilara Miller," Lily confirmed, her voice earnest. "She's the best mama in the world. She tells us stories and sings songs, even when she's tired." She then reached into the pocket of her thin jacket and pulled out the crumpled envelope he had seen earlier. With trembling fingers, she extracted a small, faded photograph. It was worn at the edges, creased from countless touches. She held it out to him. "This is her, our mama." Alexander took the photograph, his hand surprisingly steady despite the tremor that ran through him. The image was slightly blurred. A candid shot of a woman with a radiant smile, her hair the color of dark honey, caught by the wind. Her eyes, even in the faded print, sparkled with a light he remembered, a light he had once basked in, a light he had thought extinguished forever. It was Ilara. His Ilara. Older, yes, lines of hardship etched faintly around her eyes and mouth, but unmistakably her. The girl he had loved with all the passion of his youth, the woman who had vanished from his life 10 years ago without a word, leaving a void no amount of success or wealth could ever fill. He felt the air leave his lungs, the carefully constructed edifice of his composure crumbling to dust. The park, the children, the distant city noise, all faded into an insignificant blur. There was only the face in the photograph, a ghost from his past, resurrected in the most impossible heart-stopping way. His Ilara. And these children, her children, were standing before him, asking for his help. The implications crashed down on him, a tidal wave of shock and dawning, terrifying realization. The photograph trembled in Alexander's hand. Ilara, it was undeniably her. The same gentle curve of her smile, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, a faint dimple he remembered tracing with his fingertip during stolen moments under summer skies. But this Ilara was different too. The vibrant spark in her eyes was muted by a weariness that tore at something deep within him. 10 years. 10 years he had believed she had abandoned him, walked away from their shared dreams without a backward glance. 10 years of bitterness and a carefully cultivated indifference that now felt like a shameful, self-imposed blindness. He looked from the photograph to the two small faces watching him, their expressions a mixture of anxiety and desperate hope. Lily and Rose, Ilara's daughters. He studied them, truly seeing them for the first time, not as an annoyance or a curiosity, but as living, breathing connections to a past he thought was buried. Rose's startling blue eyes, so like. He pushed the thought away, not daring to give it form. Lily's determined chin, a miniature echo of Ilara's own quiet strength. A maelstrom of emotions churned within him, shock, disbelief, a sharp, unexpected pang of regret, and an overwhelming, suffocating confusion. How could this be? Why had she never contacted him if she was in trouble? Why had she let him believe she had simply vanished into thin air? The questions hammered at him, each one a fresh blow to his carefully ordered world. "Your mother, Ilara," he began, his voice hoarse, unrecognizable even to himself. "Where is she now? How sick is she?" Lily's face crumpled with relief at his apparent concern. "She's at home, in our apartment. She coughs a lot, and she's always tired. The lady from the clinic said she needs to see a proper doctor, a specialist, but we don't have the money," Rose added, her voice barely a whisper. "And the landlord said if we don't pay the rent, we have to leave." Alexander's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. Ilara, ill and impoverished, raising 2 daughters alone. His Ilara. The injustice of it, the sheer stark reality of her struggle, hit him with the force of a physical blow. He who lived in unparalleled luxury, while she... He felt a wave of shame so profound it nearly buckled his knees. He had spent a decade nursing a wounded pride, a sense of betrayal, while she had been fighting for survival. What had happened 10 years ago? The official story, the one he had eventually forced himself to accept, was that she had simply left. No note, no explanation. Just an empty apartment and a silence that had deafened him to joy ever since. He had searched, of course, in those early, frantic months, hired private investigators, but she had vanished as if she was smoke. Now, he realized, he hadn't searched hard enough, or perhaps he hadn't wanted to find a truth more painful than abandonment. He looked at the girls, their thin coats inadequate against the encroaching chill of the late afternoon. "What is her full name now? Your mother's?" "Ilara Miller," Lily repeated patiently. "She used to be Ilara Vance before she said she had to change it to keep us safe." Vance. His heart lurched. That was her maiden name, the name he knew, the one she had used when they were together. Why Miller? Why the need to keep them safe? Safe from whom? A darker, more sinister possibility began to take root in his mind. He needed answers, and he needed them now. He made a decision, swift and absolute. "Mark," he said into his discreet earpiece, "I need everything you can find on Ilara Vance, also known as Ilara Miller. Last known address with the children, urgently and discreetly, very discreetly." He turned back to the girls, a newfound resolve hardening his features. "I will help your mother," he said, the words tasting foreign but right on his tongue. "Take me to her." Just then his phone buzzed. A text from his sister, Cassandra. "Heard you were consorting with street urchins in the park, brother dear. Developing a penchant for charity cases, or just bored?" A cold fury unlike anything he had felt in years surged through him. Cassandra, her timing, her tone, it was too coincidental. Had she known about Ilara all along? The thought was monstrous, almost too vile to contemplate. He pocketed the phone, his expression grim. The pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed were beginning to surface, and he had a chilling suspicion that Cassandra was somehow at the center of it. Mark's efficiency was, as always, remarkable. Within the hour, as Alexander sat in a sterile private waiting room he'd requisitioned at a nearby upscale hotel, a preliminary report was delivered. Ilara Vance, now Miller. Address confirmed. A dilapidated tenement in the West District. Medical history. Sporadic visits to a low-income clinic for a persistent respiratory condition worsening over the last year. Financial status. Dire. No known family support. And then, the detail that made Alexander's blood run cold. A flagged note from a private investigator's report, dated nearly 10 years prior, commissioned by Cassandra Sterling, detailing Ilara Vance's departure from the city, a one-way bus ticket purchased in cash. Cassandra. His own sister had known. She had tracked Ilara. Why? What possible motive could she have had to monitor and perhaps even facilitate Ilara's disappearance? The implications were sickening. Had Cassandra engineered their breakup? Had she threatened Ilara? The sweet, gentle Ilara, he remembered, would have been vulnerable to such pressure, especially if Cassandra had used Alexander's name, his family's influence. A wave of nausea washed over him. He had blamed Ilara for a decade, harbored a cold knot of resentment, while all along she might have been a victim of his family's machinations. He felt a surge of protective fury, not just for Ilara, but for the two innocent children caught in this web of deceit, Lily and Rose, his daughters. The thought, once a wild, inadmissible flicker, now blazed in his mind. Their age, their features, Ilara's sudden departure around the time they would have been conceived. It all pointed to a truth so profound it threatened to shatter his world. He had to see her. He had to know. He dismissed Mark, needing to do this alone. The address led him to a crumbling brick building, its windows grimy, the air thick with the smell of damp and decay. It was a world away from his own, a stark testament to the life Ilara had been forced to endure. He climbed the creaking, dimly lit stairs, his heart hammering against his ribs. Apartment 3B. The paint on the door was peeling. A small handmade wreath of dried flowers, undoubtedly the girl's handiwork, hanging slightly askew. He hesitated, his hand hovering before. What would he say? What could he possibly say after all this time, after all his ignorance? He thought of the Ilara in the faded photograph, her smile tinged with a sadness that now seemed to accuse him. He thought of Lily's brave plea, Rose's silent tears. Taking a ragged breath, he knocked. The sound echoed in the narrow hallway. He heard a muffled shuffling from within, then a weak, rasping cough that tore at his conscience. The door opened a crack, and a sliver of a face peered out. Then, wider. Ilara stood before him, a ghost of her former self. She was shockingly thin, her skin pale, dark circles under her eyes. Those beautiful, luminous eyes he had never forgotten, now clouded with illness and disbelief. She swayed slightly, her hand gripping the doorframe for support. Her hair, once a vibrant cascade, was dull and tied back loosely. She wore a threadbare cardigan over a faded dress. But it was her, unmistakably. Her eyes widened as she recognized him, a gasp escaping her lips. "Alexander," she whispered, his name a fragile breath, a sound he hadn't heard in a decade, a sound that undid him completely. Time seemed to stop. The years fell away, and they were just two people standing on the precipice of a truth that had been buried for too long. Her expression shifted from shock to a confusing mix of fear, pain, and something else. A flicker of the old warmth, quickly extinguished. He could see the questions in her eyes, the same questions that were raging within him. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken words, lost years, and the undeniable presence of a past that had finally, irrevocably, caught up with them. Ilara swayed, her knuckles white as she gripped the doorframe. "Alexander, what are you doing here?" Her voice was raspy, weak, but the shock in her eyes was potent. He saw a flicker of fear too, and it cut him deeper than any corporate betrayal ever could. He, who had once been her safe harbor, was now a source of alarm. "Ilara," he managed, his own voice tight with a decade of unspoken emotions. "The girls, Lily and Rose, they found me. They asked for help." Understanding, followed by a wave of mortification, washed over her face. "Oh no, I told them not to bother anyone." She coughed then, a deep, racking sound that shook her frail frame. Instinctively, Alexander reached out to steady her, his hand closing over her arm. She was so fragile, the bones delicate beneath his touch. The contact, after so long, sent a jolt through them both. She flinched slightly, but didn't pull away, too weak to protest. "You're ill, Ilara," he stated, his voice softening with a concern that surprised even himself. "Very ill." Just then, Lily and Rose, hearing their voices, appeared from the dim interior of the apartment. Seeing Alexander with their mother, their faces lit up. "Mama, you see, Mr. Sterling came. He said he'd help," Lily exclaimed, rushing forward. Rose followed, more hesitantly, her gaze fixed on Alexander with an almost worshipful awe. Ilara looked from her hopeful daughters to Alexander, her expression a painful mix of gratitude and despair. I don't understand," she murmured, her gaze searching his. Before he could explain, before she could ask the questions that hung heavy in the air between them, her eyes rolled back, and she crumpled, a dead weight in his arms. "Mama!" the girls cried in unison, their voices sharp with terror. Alexander caught Ilara, a surge of adrenaline momentarily overriding his shock. She was terrifyingly light. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through him. "Mark!" he barked into his earpiece, his voice ragged. "Emergency medical, my location now, and get my personal physician on the line." He carried Ilara into the tiny, sparsely furnished apartment. It was clean but threadbare, the poverty a palpable presence. A small sofa, a rickety table, two small cots in an alcove. This was where she had raised their daughters. The certainty of it settled in his soul, an undeniable truth. He laid her gently on the sofa, her face ashen. Lily and Rose were crying, clinging to his legs, their small bodies trembling. "Is Mama going to die?" Rose sobbed, her face buried in his expensive trousers. Alexander knelt, pulling them close, his heart aching with a pain he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. "No, sweetheart. She's going to be all right, I promise. We're going to get her the best doctors." He spoke with a conviction he didn't entirely feel. but he had to be strong for them. For her. The paramedics arrived with astonishing speed, followed closely by Dr. Alistair Finch, Alexander's renowned personal physician, looking bewildered to be summoned to such a neighborhood. Ilara was stabilized, an oxygen mask placed over her face, an IV line started. Dr. Finch's initial assessment was grim. Severe pneumonia, complicated by malnutrition and exhaustion, Mr. Sterling. She's running a very high fever. She should have been hospitalized weeks ago. Weeks. While he had been closing multi-million-dollar deals, Ilara had been fading away in this forgotten corner of the city. The guilt was a physical weight. He made arrangements for Ilara to be transferred to the best private hospital, a suite prepared, specialists alerted. As they carried Ilara out on a stretcher, Lily clutched his hand. "You won't leave her, will you, Mr. Sterling?" she asked, her eyes wide and pleading. "Never," Alexander vowed, the word tearing from him with an unexpected force. He looked at these two small girls, their faces mirroring Ilara's, their resilience a testament to her strength. They were his, and he would protect them and their mother with everything he had. Later that evening at the hospital, as Ilara lay sleeping, sedated and stable for now, Cassandra arrived. She swept into the private waiting room, her expression a mask of cool disapproval. "Alexander, what is the meaning of this circus? I've had calls from the hospital board. You've practically commandeered an entire wing for that woman." Her voice dripped with disdain. "That woman," Alexander said, his voice dangerously quiet, "is Ilara. And these," he gestured to Lily and Rose, who were curled up asleep on a sofa, exhausted but refusing to leave the hospital, "are her daughters." Cassandra scoffed. "Don't be a fool, Alexander. She's clearly a gold digger. Appearing out of nowhere with two conveniently aged children. It's a classic ploy." Alexander rose to his full height, his eyes like chips of ice. "Get out, Cassandra." "Alexander, be reasonable. Think of the family name, the scandal." "I said get out," he repeated, his voice low and menacing. "And if I discover you had anything to do with Ilara's disappearance 10 years ago, or her suffering since, there will be no corner of this earth where you can hide from me." Cassandra's composure faltered for a split second, a flicker of something unreadable, fear, guilt, in her eyes before she masked it. "You're being overly dramatic and foolish." With a swish of her expensive coat, she turned and left, but not before casting a venomous glare towards the sleeping children. Alexander watched her go, a cold certainty hardening within him. This was far from over. His fight for Ilara and for his newly discovered family had just begun. Ilara drifted in and out of consciousness for 2 days, the fever stubbornly clinging to her. Alexander rarely left her side, a silent, watchful guardian. Lily and Rose, under the gentle care of a nurse he'd hired, spent their days in a comfortable room nearby, their small hands creating a mountain of get-well-soon drawings for their mother. Mark, meanwhile, had been digging. The information he unearthed was damning. Financial records showed a significant sum of money transferred from a discretionary fund controlled by Cassandra into an untraceable offshore account, and then withdrawn in cash in Ilara's hometown, just days after Ilara had last been seen by Alexander. There were also copies of emails, heavily encrypted but partially recovered by Mark's forensic team, from Cassandra to an unscrupulous private investigator, instructing him to ensure Miss Vance understands her presence is no longer welcome, and that a quiet departure would be in everyone's best interest, especially hers. On the 3rd day, Ilara's fever broke. She woke, weak but lucid, her eyes clearing to find Alexander sitting by her bed, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that was both unnerving and strangely comforting. The room was luxurious, a far cry from her cramped apartment. Sunlight streamed through the large window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "Alexander?" she whispered, her voice still hoarse. "Where?" "You're safe, Ilara," he said gently. "You're in a hospital. You've been very ill." He paused, then, unable to hold back the question that had consumed him, asked, "Why, Ilara? Why did you leave? Why didn't you ever contact me?" Tears welled in her eyes, spilling onto the pristine white pillowcase. Hesitantly, her voice trembling, she began to speak. She told him about Cassandra's visit 10 years ago, how his sister had come to her small apartment, her words like poisoned darts. Cassandra had told her that Alexander was tired of her, that their relationship was an embarrassment to the Sterling family, a distraction from his important career. She'd said Alexander wanted her gone, but was too kind or weak to say it to her face, so he had sent Cassandra to deliver the message. "She told me. She said you wanted me to disappear," Ilara choked out, the memory still raw. "She said if I truly loved you, I would leave and not cause a scandal that could ruin your future. She gave me money. A lot of money. She said it was from you, a severance package, to start a new life far away." Ilara, young, deeply in love, and completely intimidated by the powerful, ruthless aura of Cassandra Sterling, had been devastated. The thought that Alexander, her Alexander, could be so cruel, so dismissive, had shattered her. "I didn't believe her at first," Ilara continued, her voice gaining a little strength as the painful memories resurfaced. "But she showed me. She had a letter, supposedly from you. It sounded cold, formal. It said you were moving on, that our liaison had run its course." Alexander listened, his face a mask of stone, but inside a volcano of rage was building. A forged letter, a lie so monstrous it had stolen 10 years of their lives. "I was heartbroken," Ilara whispered. "I didn't know what to do. Cassandra warned me never to contact you again, that your family would make my life a misery if I tried. I was scared. So I took the money and I left. I just ran." She had fled back to her small hometown, only to discover a few weeks later that she was pregnant with Alexander's children. "I wanted to tell you," she said, her gaze pleading with him to understand. "So many times I picked up the phone. I wrote letters I never sent, but Cassandra's threats, they echoed in my mind. And then I saw articles about you, about your success, your engagements to socially prominent women. It seemed you had moved on, just like she said. I didn't want to disrupt your life, your happiness with us." Alexander reached out and took her hand, his grip gentle but firm. "There was no happiness, Ilara, not without you." His voice was thick with emotion. "Cassandra lied about everything. I never wanted you to leave. I searched for you. I grieved for you." Ilara stared at him, the truth dawning in her eyes, a truth that was both a relief and an agony. 10 lost years. 10 years of hardship for her, of emptiness for him, all built on a foundation of malicious lies. Just then, Lily and Rose tiptoed into the room, their faces bright. "Mama, you're awake!" They rushed to her bedside, carefully climbing up to hug her. Alexander watched them, these beautiful, resilient girls, his daughters. A fierce, protective love swelled in his chest. He had found them. He had found Ilara, and he would move heaven and earth to make up for the years Cassandra had stolen. His gaze met Ilara's over the heads of their children, a silent vow passing between them. The fight was not just against Cassandra anymore. It was a fight to reclaim their stolen past and build a future, together. The following weeks were a whirlwind of recovery and rediscovery. Ilara slowly regained her strength, the best medical care working its wonders, but more potent was the relief of the truth finally being out, and the quiet, unwavering presence of Alexander by her side. He brought Lily and Rose to the hospital every day. The girls, initially shy around him, began to blossom under his tentative but genuine affection. Lily, always the bolder one, would pepper him with questions about his tall buildings and fast cars, while Rose, quieter and more observant, would often just watch him, a small, thoughtful smile on her face, occasionally offering him a crayon drawing of their new family. Alexander, a man who had once found children an alien species, discovered an unexpected joy in their company. He learned about their favorite cartoons, their fear of thunderstorms, Lily's ambition to be a vet, and Rose's talent for making up fantastical stories. He read to them, his deep voice, usually reserved for boardroom pronouncements, softening as he narrated tales of brave knights and magical creatures. He saw Ilara in their smiles, in their resilience, in their capacity for unquestioning love. With Ilara, the conversations were more complex, layered with a decade of pain and misunderstanding. They talked for hours, piecing together the lost years. He told her of his hollow successes, the string of meaningless relationships, the gnawing emptiness that had become his constant companion. She spoke of her struggles as a single mother, the poverty, the fear, but also the fierce love for her daughters that had kept her going. There were tears, many of them, for what had been stolen from them, for the hardships she had endured alone. But beneath the sorrow, a fragile seedling of hope began to sprout. The love they had shared, buried for so long under layers of deceit and misunderstanding, was not entirely extinguished. It was there, embers glowing faintly, waiting for the breath of truth to reignite it. Meanwhile, Cassandra Sterling was not idle. Furious at being publicly defied by Alexander and terrified of her duplicity being fully exposed, she launched a vicious counterattack. Tabloid headlines screamed, "Millionaire's lost love or calculated gold digger. Ilara Miller's convenient reappearance." Anonymous sources, clearly fed by Cassandra, painted Ilara as a manipulative schemer who had abandoned Alexander years ago, only to resurface with children of questionable paternity, aiming for a share of the Sterling fortune. Worse, Cassandra, leveraging her connections, anonymously reported Ilara to Child Protective Services, alleging neglect and an unstable environment, hoping to have the children removed and Ilara discredited beyond repair. Alexander was incandescent with rage when Mark brought him the news. "She will not get away with this," he vowed, his voice a low growl. "Mark, I want everything we have on Cassandra, every shady deal, every underhanded tactic, every penny she's siphoned from the family foundation for her own vanity projects. I want her exposed." Mark, ever loyal and now fiercely protective of Ilara and the girls himself, nodded. "I've already started, sir. Her web is extensive but not impenetrable." The threat from child services was more immediate. A stern-faced social worker, Ms. Albright, arrived at the hospital for an interview. Ilara was terrified, but Alexander stood by her, calm and resolute. He presented Ilara's full medical reports, detailed his commitment to providing for her and the children, and outlined his plans for their future. Lily and Rose, coached gently by Alexander, spoke with simple, heartfelt honesty about their mother's love and care, their innocent words a powerful counter to Cassandra's venomous accusations. Ms. Albright, initially skeptical, seemed to soften, observing the genuine affection within the nascent family unit. However, she stated that a home visit and further investigation would be necessary once Ilara was discharged. The pressure was immense. Alexander knew Cassandra was pulling strings, trying to poison the well. He had to act decisively, not just to protect Ilara and the girls, but to neutralize Cassandra once and for all. The annual Sterling Family Foundation Charity Gala was less than a week away, an event Cassandra chaired and considered the pinnacle of her social calendar. It would be the perfect stage. The Sterling Family Foundation Charity Gala was the jewel in Cassandra's social crown, an opulent affair attended by the city's elite, all eager to see and be seen. Cassandra, draped in diamonds and a couture gown, preened under the spotlight, oblivious to the storm about to break. Alexander arrived late, Ilara on his arm. She was pale but radiant, dressed in a simple, elegant gown Alexander had chosen, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to Cassandra's flamboyant display. Lily and Rose were safely tucked in at a nearby hotel suite with a trusted nanny, excited about the grown-up party their parents were attending. Whispers followed Alexander and Ilara as they entered the grand ballroom. The tabloid stories had done their work. Speculative glances and hushed gossip filled the air. Cassandra, seeing them, stiffened, her smile becoming a brittle mask. She approached, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Alexander, darling, and Ilara, how brave of you to come." Alexander ignored her, his gaze sweeping the room. He waited until Cassandra took the stage to give her welcoming speech, her voice resonating with carefully rehearsed platitudes about family values and philanthropy. Then, as she basked in the polite applause, Alexander moved. He strode to the secondary podium, Mark discreetly signaling the audio-visual technicians. A large screen behind the stage, intended for a slideshow of the Foundation's charitable works, flickered to life. "Good evening." Alexander's voice, amplified by the microphone, cut through the murmurs. "My sister speaks eloquently of family values. I'd like to share a story about just how my family, or rather certain members of it, operate." Cassandra's face went rigid. On the screen, documents appeared. Bank statements showing the transfer of funds from Cassandra's account to the investigator. Copies of the recovered emails detailing her instructions to deal with Ilara Vance. Then, a recording began to play. A secretly taped conversation, obtained by Mark through means Alexander didn't ask about, between Cassandra and one of her cronies, callously discussing how to discredit Ilara and ensure Alexander remained unencumbered. The crony even mentioned how Cassandra had bragged years ago about solving the Ilara problem by faking a letter from Alexander. The ballroom fell into a stunned silence, broken only by Cassandra's choked gasp. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing the cold, calculating greed beneath. Alexander's voice was clear and steady as he narrated the truth of Ilara's disappearance, Cassandra's decade-long deception, and her recent attempts to destroy Ilara and separate her from her children. He spoke of Ilara's quiet strength, her resilience, and the unwavering love she had shown their daughters despite unimaginable hardship. He then looked directly at Ilara, his voice softening. "This woman, Ilara Vance, is the love of my life. These past 10 years, I believed she left me. I now know she was driven away by cruelty and deceit. And Lily and Rose," his voice broke slightly, "are my daughters. They are sterling blood, and they and their mother will want for nothing and will be protected with every resource I command." He turned his gaze, now like chips of granite, back to his sister, who stood frozen, her face ashen. "As for Cassandra Sterling," Alexander continued, his voice resonating with cold fury, "her actions speak for themselves. She has betrayed not only me and Ilara and our innocent children, but she has also betrayed the very principles this foundation purports to uphold, embezzling funds for her personal gain." More documents flashed on the screen, evidence of Cassandra's financial misdeeds within the foundation. Gasps rippled through the audience. Several prominent board members looked aghast. Cassandra tried to speak, to deny, but no words came. She was exposed, her reputation shattered in a matter of minutes, in front of the very people whose admiration she craved. Alexander concluded, "Effective immediately, Cassandra Sterling is removed from her position on the board of Sterling Industries and the Sterling Family Foundation." I trust the relevant authorities will take an interest in her other activities." He then walked over to Ilara, took her hand, and gently led her from the ballroom, leaving behind a scene of utter chaos and the smouldering ruins of Cassandra Sterling's life. The silence in their wake was deafening, soon to be replaced by the cacophony of a scandal that would rock the city. But Alexander didn't care. He had his family. He had the truth. And for the first time in a decade, he felt a sense of peace. The fallout from the gala was immediate and spectacular. Cassandra Sterling became a pariah overnight. The foundation board scrambled to distance themselves, launching a full investigation into her financial dealings. Legal charges followed swiftly, not just for embezzlement, but related to her harassment of Ilara and attempts to obstruct justice by influencing child protective services. Her carefully curated world of socialite glamour and whispered power imploded, leaving her isolated and facing the very real prospect of prison. Alexander, true to his word, ensured she faced the full consequences of her actions, but beyond that, he spared her no further thought. His focus was entirely on Ilara and their daughters. Ilara, now free from the shadow of Cassandra's threats and the burden of her secrets, began to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. The lines of worry on her face softened, replaced by a quiet serenity Alexander hadn't seen since their youth. With Ms. Albright, the social worker, they were open and honest. The luxurious hospital suite had been replaced by a warm, sun-filled temporary residence Alexander had leased. A house with a garden, a stark contrast to both his sterile penthouse and Ilara's former cramped apartment. Ms. Albright's home visits became less about investigation and more about observation of a family clearly bonding, healing, and finding its rhythm. The love between Ilara and her daughters was undeniable, and Alexander's devotion to all three of them was palpable. The case was eventually closed, with a glowing report on Ilara's parenting and the stable, loving environment being created. Alexander, for the first time, began to truly understand the meaning of home. It wasn't about square footage or expensive art. It was about shared laughter, bedtime stories, and the comforting presence of loved ones. He found himself looking at properties, not cold, imposing mansions, but spacious, welcoming houses with room for Lily's hoped-for menagerie of pets and Rose's art supplies. He and Ilara spent hours talking, truly talking, bridging the chasm of the lost decade. They shared memories of their youth, the dreams they'd had, the pain of their separation, and the tentative, fragile hope for a future together. Forgiveness wasn't a single act, but a process, a gentle unfolding of understanding and acceptance. He learned to forgive Ilara for not finding him sooner, understanding the fear and manipulation that had held her captive. She, in turn, forgave him for the years of perceived abandonment, knowing now the truth of Cassandra's deceit. The girls were the glue that bound them, their innocent joy a constant reminder of what truly mattered. Lily, fearless and curious, dragged Alexander on adventures in the garden, teaching him the names of bugs and flowers. Rose, more introspective, would sit with him, drawing intricate pictures of their family, always placing Alexander and Ilara side by side, holding hands. He discovered he was good at untangling kite strings, at making silly faces, at comforting away nightmares. These small acts of fatherhood filled a void in him he hadn't known was so vast. He began to delegate more at Sterling Industries, realizing that the relentless pursuit of wealth had cost him dearly. His priorities had shifted, his definition of success rewritten. It was no longer about the next acquisition or the bottom line, but about tucking his daughters into bed, about seeing Ilara smile freely, about the simple, profound joy of belonging. The road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, but for the first time in a long, long time, Alexander Sterling felt not like a millionaire, but like a man who truly had everything. The transformation in Alexander Sterling was profound, visible to all who knew him. The sharp edges of his personality softened, the aloofness replaced by a warmth and approachability that astonished his colleagues. He still commanded Sterling Industries with acumen, but his decisions were now tempered with a newfound empathy, a broader perspective on what constituted true value. He smiled more, laughed easily, the ghosts of his past finally laid to rest by the vibrant, living presence of his family. He bought a sprawling but unpretentious house in the countryside, with rolling lawns, a rambling garden, and a small wood nearby. It was filled with light and laughter, a far cry from the oppressive opulence of his former penthouse. Lily promptly adopted a rescue dog and 2 kittens, and Rose set up an art studio in a sun-drenched conservatory. Ilara, her health fully restored, her spirit rekindled, filled the home with the aroma of baking and the sound of her gentle singing, melodies Alexander remembered from a lifetime ago. Their days settled into a comfortable rhythm. Alexander made it a point to be home for dinner every night, to help with homework, to read bedtime stories. Weekends were for family adventures, picnics in the countryside, trips to the zoo, building elaborate Lego castles that inevitably got knocked over by an errant kitten. He taught the girls to ride bikes, to swim in their backyard pool, to appreciate the simple beauty of a sunset. Ilara and Alexander rediscovered their love, no longer the frantic passion of youth, but a deeper, more mature connection forged in the crucible of loss and reunion, strengthened by their shared devotion to their children. They talked, they laughed, they held hands, the lost decade fading into a shared history that, while painful, had ultimately brought them back to each other, stronger and more appreciative. Cassandra, after a lengthy trial, was found guilty on multiple counts. Her sentence was substantial, her name forever tarnished. Alexander felt no triumph, only a quiet sense of justice done, a chapter closed. His energy was for the future, for the family he had almost lost. One sunny afternoon, they were all in the garden. Alexander was pushing Lily and Rose on a swing set he had assembled himself, his tie discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up. Ilara sat on a nearby bench, sketching in a pad, a soft smile on her face as she watched them. Lily's laughter pealed through the air as Alexander pushed her higher, Rose shouting, "Me next, Daddy! Me next!" Daddy. The word still sent a thrill of warmth through him. He looked at Ilara, their eyes meeting over the heads of their daughters. In her gaze he saw love, forgiveness, and a shared future that stretched bright and inviting before them. He was no longer the sad rich man, but simply a man, rich in love, blessed with a family, redeemed by a second chance he had never expected. The emptiness that had defined him for so long was filled, overflowing with a joy so profound it felt like a miracle. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that this was where he was always meant to be,